Hello, I'm Aurora, and everything unfolded at an alarming pace, spiraling out of control. I never envisioned that I would find myself in the position of preventing my own mother from making disastrous choices to safeguard our family. Nor did I anticipate her sudden transformation into a teenager. Yet today, after countless attempts and a torrent of tears, life has finally reverted to its rightful course. Our household now comprises my mom, dad, and my younger brother. Since my earliest memories, I've been accustomed to my parents' constant bickering. However, those disputes typically reached a resolution, and we would revert to our familiar routine. I often reassured myself that it was normal. Every grown-up grapples with their own dilemmas and employs distinct strategies to address them. What truly mattered was the resilience and unity of our family, despite the disagreements. Regrettably, that conviction didn't endure. One evening, while engrossed in my computer game, I was startled by my father's thunderous outburst. It marked the first time he had exhibited such behavior. Anxious for their well-being and that of my brother and myself, I stealthily ventured out of my room, concealing myself behind the sofa to observe the unfolding drama. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but my concern overtook me. Their confrontation persisted until my mother, in a fit of rage, stormed out of the house, forcefully slamming the door behind her. My father retreated to his bedroom and acted as though he was unperturbed by the tumultuous events. This was the inaugural instance of my mother departing the house after a quarrel and venturing out into the night. Lost in bewilderment and desolation, I was uncertain about how to proceed, so I retreated to my own room. As I lay in bed, my mind replayed her hurtful words incessantly, and their altercation dominated my thoughts. My mom unleashed a barrage of hurtful words, branding my dad as useless and domineering, asserting that she could no longer tolerate him or his actions. In retaliation, my dad labeled her as a self-centered woman who cared for no one but herself. After a restless hour of tossing and turning in bed, my pursuit of sleep proved futile. My mother had yet to return home, and my anxiety and fear swelled with each passing moment. Desperation led me to open the window and peer out onto the dimly lit street, awaiting her return. However, while I stood vigil, exhaustion overcame me, and I inadvertently drifted into slumber. The next thing I knew, my mother gently tapped my shoulder and informed me that it was time for school. "Where have you been?" I inquired. She replied with a feigned innocence, "What do you mean, honey? I was here all night." Though I knew she was lying, I chose to remain silent. That day felt interminable, but eventually, it came to an end, or so I believed. That very night, my parents resumed their quarrel. My mother initiated it, but this time they conducted their dispute within my and my brother's presence. My younger sibling sought refuge behind me, while my father retreated to his room and shut the door, a clear attempt to evade my mother, who exhibited erratic behavior. Once more, my mother left the house, leaving me to grapple with the bewildering circumstances alongside my little brother. That night, my brother found solace in my room, driven by his fear, while I stationed myself on the porch, patiently awaiting my mother's return. 3 long hours elapsed. She returned home in the company of an unfamiliar man who had driven her back in his car in the dead of night. As they exited the vehicle, I witnessed something that sent shockwaves through me. This stranger dared to kiss my mother. It was beyond belief. I couldn't fathom who he was and what gave him the audacity to kiss my mother. Once she entered the house, I snapped out of my stupor and hastily retreated to my bed. I sensed her cautiously opening the door to check on me, ensuring that no one had witnessed her actions. She wanted to make certain her secret remained hidden. The following morning, my father departed for work early, as was his routine, while my brother and I gathered for breakfast. My brother appeared unfazed, devouring his food with gusto, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding us. He was just a child, blissfully unaware of the complexities. In contrast, I sat at the table, my breakfast untouched, preoccupied by the haunting events of the previous night. Should I confront her about what I had witnessed? I gazed at her, noticing she was adorned in a new short purple dress, and her makeup was immaculate. My mother only dressed like this for special occasions. I mustered the courage to ask her, "Where did you go yesterday?" Her response was, "I was just getting some fresh air, honey." I pressed further, "Why are you dressed up so nicely today? Are you going to an event?" Her reply was casual, "No, I just wanted to look nice for a change." Once again, she evaded the truth. I had a strong suspicion that she was harboring a significant secret from me. In a sarcastic tone, I remarked, "You look beautiful." Deep within, I harbored a hope that she would recognize that I had uncovered her secret. However, that hope remained unfulfilled. From that point onward, it felt as though our lives had been upended. My father devoted most of his time to work, seeking refuge from my mother's ceaseless tirades and accusations. When he did come home, he would eat and retreat to sleep. My mother persisted in her nightly escapades, convinced that none of us would be the wiser. The entire situation was excruciating to bear. My anger towards her swelled. She was tearing our family apart, and I felt powerless to intervene. I couldn't confide in my father, as that would only exacerbate matters. Moreover, I couldn't confront my mother and label her a liar without concrete evidence. I had noticed her unusual morning routine, where she dressed up, which was out of character for her. However, I needed tangible proof to confront her. One day, while her phone lay unattended on the dining room table and she was preoccupied, I seized the opportunity. I discreetly pocketed her phone, retreated to my room, and delved into her messages. There, I stumbled upon a message exchange between her and the mysterious man, arranging to meet at a coffee shop at 3 o'clock. Fortunately, this particular coffee shop happened to be near my school. I returned the phone without her detecting my actions. If I had been even a second too late, my mother would have caught me red-handed and the entire plan would have unraveled. Fortune favored me that day. Precisely at 3 p.m., I discreetly positioned myself in a corner, patiently awaiting my mother's arrival at the cafe. As soon as she entered, I hesitated for a moment and then quietly slipped in behind her, choosing a table where I could remain concealed from her view. What I witnessed next left me utterly aghast. My mother was laughing boisterously with this stranger, behaving like a carefree teenager, while he had his hand resting on her shoulder. The entire scene was profoundly distressing, and it was exacerbated when he leaned in to kiss her. I couldn't contain myself any longer. I impulsively confronted her, lunging toward her and pointing my finger, shouting, "Cheater. You think I'm clueless? I'm aware of everything. You can't deceive me this time. I'm going to expose you as a fraud." In response, she glared at me with anger, ushered me outside, and began scolding me vehemently. I couldn't fathom her audacity to be unashamed of her actions. I felt an overwhelming sense of shame to be associated with her as her daughter. I harbored intense resentment toward her for her actions and their impact on our family. This wasn't the mother I knew. If she truly were, she wouldn't have chosen another man over my father. Who did she believe she was? My singular objective became seeking retribution for how effortlessly she had disregarded me, my brother, and my father. I no longer wished to acknowledge her as my mother. I resolved that when we were all seated together at the table, I would divulge everything to my father, fearlessly sharing every detail I had uncovered. As much as I longed to witness my mother's face contorted in embarrassment and humiliation, her hands attempting to conceal it, I couldn't bring myself to do it. When night fell and we all gathered around the dinner table, everything appeared harmonious. My mother played the role of the perfect mother, my father was at ease, and my brother radiated happiness and energy, a stark departure from his recent demeanor. To all outward appearances, they resembled the family they once were. I remained the sole bearer of the knowledge that my mother was merely putting on an act. However, my fear of tearing my family apart held me back. My mother regarded me with her usual expression, and I berated myself internally for feigning ignorance. Countless nights were spent tormenting myself over my momentary lapse. Not only had I missed my chance, but I had inadvertently facilitated my mother's ongoing infidelity. I couldn't bear to witness her continue down this path of deceit and betrayal, yet I needed to devise a prudent solution. Ultimately, I concluded that I had to make the intruder vanish from our lives, compelling my mother to return to us. I decided to take action regarding the man's car. I reasoned that if I damaged his vehicle, he might be deterred from returning. It sounded like a viable plan. Every night, I awaited my mother's exit from her car, concealed behind a small tree in our backyard, clutching a sizable rock, ready to embark on my mission. As my mother's lover arrived, I hurled the rock at the back of his car, and the glass shattered into 1,000 fragments. He promptly emerged from his vehicle, fury ablaze in his eyes, searching for the perpetrator. However, upon discovering me standing defiantly before him, unwavering in my resolve to end his involvement with my mother. His countenance faltered. My mother called out my name, her voice firm and demanding, gesturing for me to come inside. But I remained steadfast, rooted in place, locking eyes with her lover, burning with anger and resentment. He exchanged a quick glance with her before wordlessly retreating to his car, never uttering a word of greeting. The following morning, my mother awaited me in the kitchen. "We need to discuss your behavior yesterday," she admonished. I couldn't hold back my retort. "My behavior? You're the one being selfish. You're behaving like a teenager who cares only about herself." I had the urge to label her as a cheater, but I restrained myself because my little brother was within earshot. Once again, I felt like I had inadvertently abetted her in her betrayal. However, this time, my indifference was growing because I believed I had effectively conveyed a message to her lover that he would think twice before returning. But I was mistaken. Despite my actions, nothing had changed. My mother continued her lengthy conversations and laughter with him, resembling a teenage girl on the phone. She persisted in wearing her short dresses and going out with him. Consequently, I resolved to escalate my efforts, convinced that I needed to take even more drastic measures. If the broken glass hadn't fazed him, perhaps the unvarnished truth about my mother's feelings would. I surreptitiously acquired his phone number from my mother's phone without her knowledge. I initiated a series of text messages to him, alleging that my mother incessantly criticized him for his weight and expressed a desire to end their relationship, but she struggled to find the right words. I even asserted that she felt foolish when in his company. However, he remained silent, refusing to respond to any of my messages. At least his car ceased to arrive to pick up my mother, a development I considered a victory. But my triumph was short-lived. The following morning, I overheard my mother's hushed conversation in the kitchen. She was apologizing to him for my impertinent behavior, asserting that I had fabricated everything to keep him away from her and that none of my accusations held any truth. She pleaded with him to meet her so she could make amends. The issue wasn't that he was clinging to my mother, as I initially presumed, but the reverse was true. My mother was the one who refused to let go. All this time, I had been attempting to keep him at bay when I should have been striving to distance her from him. This endeavor would be considerably more challenging because despite being aware of my knowledge of her infidelity and witnessing my efforts to thwart her, she displayed no concern and never contemplated ending their relationship. She didn't care that while she was relishing her moments with her lover outside our home, her daughter was consumed by anger. So, why would she even consider breaking up with him if I asked her to? I found myself with no alternative but to make her feel the consequences of her choices. My strategy? Feigning illness. That evening during dinner, I pretended to lose consciousness. I collapsed onto the floor and mimicked violent shaking and trembling. I meticulously followed the steps I had witnessed on a medical program about epilepsy. I was determined not to make any mistakes that would reveal my ruse. While I feigned my condition, I remained acutely aware of my surroundings. The reaction was a shock to everyone. My father rushed toward me while my brother stood frozen in place. My mother, on the other hand, appeared torn, uncertain of which way to turn. When those agonizing seconds had passed, my mother hurried to me, enfolding me in a tight embrace. I could feel her heart pounding against my chest, seemingly on the verge of bursting. Perhaps this would work, I thought optimistically. That night, I simulated having a headache. My parents were utterly perplexed by the incident. Together, they escorted me to my room, tucked me into bed, and remained at my side until I drifted into slumber. The following morning, my mother was dressed in casual attire. Upon seeing me, she positioned herself beside me and took my hand, wary that I might falter. She gently seated me on the couch and inquired about how I felt that day. "I'm fine," I replied. She regarded me with a sympathetic gaze, burdened by guilt. After a brief silence, she disclosed, "I called a doctor. He suggested that what transpired yesterday might have been due to exhaustion or overthinking." She continued, "I also contacted your school to inform them of your absence today. I intend to spend the entire day with you." Her words provided me with solace, but my objective extended beyond just one day. It was a lasting transformation. That evening, I anxiously awaited the moment when my entire family would convene around the dinner table, affording me the opportunity to feign unconsciousness once more. This time, I executed my act with even greater precision. As anticipated, my performance garnered me undivided attention throughout the night. I persisted in this charade night after night until it eventually led to a trip to the hospital. To be honest, I hadn't foreseen my lies spiraling to this extent, but everything had unfolded far more smoothly than I had dared hope. My mother devoted herself to my care, staying awake throughout the night, and my father, on one occasion, came in and presented her with a cup of coffee. He sat beside her, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. It had been a considerable while since I had witnessed my parents in such proximity, and it warmed my heart. I reassured myself that my plan had indeed succeeded. All I needed was to persuade my mother to end her relationship with that individual. It took several days before the doctor granted me permission to return home. During the journey back, my parents reminisced about the day I was born, recounting the joy of holding their own child. As the conversation progressed, my mother turned to my father and uttered, "I love you. I love all of you." Gradually, life resumed its normalcy. My father resumed his work routine and I returned to school. However, I still harbored doubts regarding my mother. Each day, I discreetly positioned myself behind the door, straining to eavesdrop on her conversations, yet I failed to detect anything suspicious. Then, one day, my mother's phone rang while she was in our midst, and I noticed her discomfort. She retrieved her phone and retreated to another room. With stealthy precision, I trailed behind her, listening in on her conversation with him without anyone's awareness. Yes, it was indeed that man who had called her. However, I overheard her saying, "I've already told you I want to remain with my husband and my family. I don't wish to go out with you or even converse with you after today." She abruptly hung up and hurriedly left the room. In the process, she caught sight of me. As she drew near, I braced myself for the inevitable consequences of my eavesdropping. But what transpired was entirely unexpected. Instead of chastising me, she enveloped me in her arms and tears welled in her eyes. "What's wrong, Mom? What's happening?" I anxiously inquired. She gazed at me, her eyes shimmering with tears, and replied, "Nothing in this vast world can replace you in my heart. I was mistaken and I admit it, but I've paid the price." Seeing her in this state shattered my heart. This was my true mother, the one who had vanished. She had finally returned. I felt compelled to alleviate her guilt, to confess the truth. "Mom, I need to tell you something," I began. She nodded, her hand gently stroking my hair. "I lied to you, to all of you. There was no other way. I didn't want our family to fall apart because of your mistakes. I tried to bring you back, but all my efforts failed. I lied to you about my illness. I wasn't sick. I merely feigned illness to gain your attention, and it worked." She studied me for a moment, seemingly at a loss for words. Eventually, she said, "During the days we spent in the hospital with your father, we ceased our quarrels to care for you. It wasn't about him or me. It was about you, because you are an integral part of this family. I realized then that nothing could replace you if I were to lose you in the end. I'm sorry for my immaturity. I didn't think beyond myself. I'm sorry for not responding to your attempts, even though I noticed them. What matters most is that you're well, and we're still together."